Okay, we're going to take a look at separation of powers and how the different branches of government, 3 of them, and how they check one another and how are they separate from one another. So we have the executive branch of government carries out the law. That would be your president and the state level governor, local level like mayor. Legislative branch makes the laws, that is Congress, and a judicial branch like the Supreme Court. Okay, so the executive branch makes up with the president, the vice president, and also his cabinet. Okay. The legislative branch is made up of Congress, and Congress is divided into 2 houses. You have the House of Representatives based on population, and the Senate, where each state gets 2 senators. And then the judicial branch, you have your Supreme Court, your circuit courts, and your district courts. Okay, let's take a look at the legislative branch. Their job is to make the laws. So you have the 2 houses of the Congress. You have the House of Representatives. That's determined by population. So you take a look at your state. Illinois has how many representatives in the House? That would be 19. Okay, also every state has 2 senators. Your current senators are Dick Durbin and Mark Kirk from Illinois. You'll need to know that for your Constitution test. Okay. Alright, let's take a look at the executive branch. They carry out the laws. Our current president is Barack Obama, and our vice president is Joe Biden. Okay, and they are Democrats. The next election will be in 2016, in which you'll have 2 candidates from each party because Barack Obama cannot serve a 3rd term. And this is his cabinet. I do need to update this, but this is your 15 members of the cabinet. Here's Hillary Clinton. She's no longer Secretary of State. Actually, Eric Holder just stepped down too. We've got the 15 departments here. You have agriculture, commerce, defense, education, energy, health and human services, homeland security, housing, urban development, interior, labor, state, transportation, treasury, veteran affairs, as well as the attorney general. What did I say? Okay, so you have these cabinet members are picked by the president, but they must be approved by the Senate, and that's how they check each other. Here's your judicial branch. This is the Supreme Court. Okay, and the president appoints these, but of course they have to be approved by the president. So when you're having a presidential election, you're not just voting for president. Sometimes you have to look at the Supreme Court and see, well, who's going to be either resigning or possibly getting really old and not being on Supreme Court very long. But they evaluate the laws, and what the Supreme Court does, they look at cases to decide whether different laws have been passed or things should be constitutional or not. Or are they constitutional? Okay, so some review here. You have the president, guys, has a maximum of 2 4-year terms. Okay, so the president cannot serve more than 2 years, or 2 terms, for 4 years. The only way the president can actually serve for 10 years, and this could happen, it's never happened, but it could, is if the president dies during the second half of his term, the vice president would take over, finish out the president's term, and then he can run, or he or she could run for either 2 more terms. But if the president were to die in the first part of his term, the vice president would take over and finish out that term, and they can only run for 1 more. So the maximum is 2 4-year terms. Of course, we have 1 president who did serve more than that. That was FDR, and he was elected actually to 4 terms and died during his 4th term. But after that, they passed the constitutional amendment limiting the power of the president serving more than terms. Okay, your House of Representatives here, okay, they have unlimited 2-year terms. So in the House, you can continue to be reelected as long as you get reelected every 2 years. A lot of times people in Congress in the House, they may serve a couple terms here and there, but then they want to end up getting into the Senate because the Senate gives you an unlimited 6-year term. So you only have to run every 6 years if you're on in the Senate. and the longer you stay, the more policy you get to make. All right, your two senators are Dick Durbin and Mark Kirk. I did leave this open because we're having an election here shortly. So the Supreme Court now, they are here for life. So they can serve as long as they live until they die. So that's lifetime appointees in the Supreme Court. Okay, so jumping over here, those are your checks and balances on how these three branches of government do things. All right, now federalism. Okay, we're going to take a look at the powers granted to the federal and state governments under the system of federalism. All right, another Venn diagram here. So federalism, guys, we take a look at the powers granted to the states versus the powers granted to the federal government or the national government. So you take a look at, these are the powers granted to the national government, and this is the only thing the national government, they can do this, but the states cannot. So you take a look at, Congress has to declare war. That would be a national rights power. So the state of Illinois or Indiana or Kentucky or whatever could not declare war on Canada, let's say, but the national government can. Okay, they create and maintain armed forces. They also establish foreign policy with foreign nations, also regulate interstate and foreign trade. They make copyright and patent laws. They also establish the post office, and they coin money or make currency. Let's jump over to the states. Okay, now the states establish local governments, establish and maintain the school system, so that goes to Springfield or wherever your capital is of your state, and they decide what's the curriculum or how much money a state is going to get. So they're in charge of schools. They regulate trade within the state. They also conduct elections. Some are better than others at that. They provide for public safety, so police, fire. They establish marriage regulations, so some states allow same-sex marriage, some do not. Some have different age groups and where you can get married. But both governments are allowed to do this. They can both raise your taxes. Thank you, state and federal governments. So when you file your taxes, sometimes you might get a tax return, and you'll get your return from the state as well as the federal government. They also provide for public welfare. Okay, also provide criminal justice. So you have a federal agents and you have your state. Then you can borrow money. They're very good at doing that too. Your state governments are great at borrowing money, and so is your federal government, 18 trillion. Charter banks, okay, and also build roads. So you have your state roads that are funded by the state, and you also have your federal roads like interstates and things that are funded by the national government. So you take a look at this, and these are some of the things that are going to be on your Constitution test coming up.